Hello! Welcome. Welcome. Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon. It's a time zone for you.
My fiance's side dude texted me at 3 a.m. She just left. Said she's marrying you for the house. I waited. Let her keep planning. Then the morning of, she found the ring gone. Venue canceled. Invitations recalled. And a bill for every expense. Sent straight to her dad. With proof. And receipts. I was dead asleep in my king-size bed in the house I'd worked my ass off to buy for the past 8 years, when my phone buzzes at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March. You know that feeling when your phone goes off in the middle of the night and your heart just drops because you know it's either an emergency or something that's about to ruin your life? Well, this was definitely the second one, and it was about to turn my entire world upside down in ways I never could have imagined. The text was from a number I didn't recognize, but the message made my blood turn to ice water and my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the phone. Some guy named Alex telling me that my fiancée Melanie had just left his apartment after spending the night, and that she'd been bragging about how she was only marrying me for my house and the financial security it represented. He said she'd been laughing about how clueless I was, how easy it was to manipulate me into paying for everything, and how she planned to divorce me after exactly 1 year and take half of everything I'd worked so hard to build. But here's where it gets really twisted. This Alex character didn't just send me one text and disappear. He kept texting me for the next hour, sending me screenshots of conversations he'd had with Melanie, photos of them together that went back months, even recordings of her talking about me like I was some kind of walking ATM machine. Apparently, she'd been telling him intimate details about our relationship, making fun of my habits, complaining about how boring I was in bed, and planning out exactly how she was going to spend my money once she had legal access to it. I sat there staring at my phone screen for probably 2 hours, reading through this mountain of evidence, hoping somehow it was all some kind of elaborate prank or case of mistaken identity. But it wasn't. The worst part was how much sense it actually made when I started thinking about it with this new information poisoning my brain. All those late nights, she claimed to be working overtime at her marketing job, always coming home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. The way she'd been pushing so hard for us to get married quickly, saying she didn't want a long engagement because life was too short to wait. This woman I'd been planning to spend my life with, who I'd bought a 4-carat engagement ring for that cost me 3 months of salary, who I'd been with for 2 years and thought I knew inside and out, was apparently playing the longest and most sophisticated con in history. And the really twisted part was how incredibly good she was at it. Melanie could cry on command whenever we had any kind of disagreement. She remembered every little detail about my day when I came home from work at the construction company. She'd make my favorite dinner when I was stressed about a difficult project. But now that I thought about it with this new information burning a hole in my brain, I started seeing all the red flags I'd been too blind or too stupid to notice. Like how she never wanted to split bills evenly, always saying her student loans were killing her budget and she could barely afford groceries. How she'd moved in with me after only 6 months of dating, claiming her lease was up and she needed somewhere temporary while she looked for a new place. How she'd never introduced me to her friends from work, always making excuses about why I couldn't come to office parties or company events. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became that I'd been played from day one. She'd targeted me specifically because I owned my house outright, had a steady income, and was stupid enough to believe that a woman who looked like she could be a model would actually fall for a regular guy like me. I'd been so flattered by her attention that I'd ignored every warning sign and red flag that should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain. By the time the sun came up, I made a decision that surprised even me and would have shocked anyone who knew me. I wasn't going to confront her immediately. I wasn't going to have some dramatic showdown where she'd probably just lie and manipulate me even more than she already had. Instead, I was going to let her keep planning this wedding she thought was going to make her rich, and then I was going to pull the rug out from under her in the most spectacular and devastating way possible. The next few weeks were the hardest acting job of my life, and I'm not even a good liar under normal circumstances. Every morning I woke up next to this woman who was planning to destroy me financially and emotionally, and I had to smile and kiss her goodbye like nothing had changed. She'd show me cake samples and ask my opinion on centerpieces, and I'd nod and smile, while mentally calculating exactly how much money I was about to save by not actually having this wedding that was supposed to cost me $45,000. But I wasn't just sitting around feeling sorry for myself and wallowing in self-pity. I was gathering evidence like I was preparing for the trial of the century, documenting everything she did and said. I hired a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Rodriguez who specialized in cheating spouses and had been doing this kind of work for over 20 years. Within a week, he had photos of Melanie going into Alex's apartment building multiple times, staying for hours at a time. He got pictures of them holding hands at restaurants across town, kissing in parking lots, acting like a couple while she was wearing the engagement ring I'd bought her. The PI also did some digging into Alex's background, and what he found was even more disturbing and twisted than I'd expected. This guy was some kind of serial relationship wrecker with a pattern that went back years. He had a history of targeting engaged women, convincing them to leave their fiancés for him, and then dumping them once the relationships imploded and he'd gotten whatever he wanted out of the situation. Melanie wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't be his last. He was like a predator who specialized in destroying people's lives for entertainment. But the real breakthrough came when Rodriguez managed to get audio recordings of their conversations through some method he wouldn't explain to me. Turns out Alex was just as much of a piece of work as Melanie was, maybe even worse. The two of them would sit around his apartment laughing about me, calling me a pathetic sugar daddy who was so desperate for love that I'd believe anything. Melanie told him she was planning to get pregnant right after the wedding, so I'd be stuck paying child support even after the divorce, and she was already researching the best divorce lawyers in the state. That's when I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting myself from a level of manipulation and financial destruction that could have ruined my entire life permanently. If she'd gone through with this plan, I would have lost my house that I'd spent 8 years paying off, my savings account that represented 15 years of careful budgeting, and been stuck paying for a kid that might not even be mine for the next 18 years. So I started making my own plans, and they were way more sophisticated than anything Melanie had cooked up. I contacted the wedding venue, a fancy country club that charged $300 per plate, and told them I needed to make some changes to our contract. Instead of just canceling outright, I had them switch everything into Melanie's name only, making her personally and financially responsible for the entire event. I did the same thing with the caterer, the photographer, the florist, the band, everyone. On paper, it looked like Melanie had decided to take control of the wedding planning, which she was actually thrilled about because she thought it meant she'd have more say in how expensive everything could be. I also started quietly liquidating some of my assets and moving money around in ways that would protect me if she tried to claim any of it. I opened new bank accounts at a different bank that Melanie didn't know about and transferred most of my savings. I changed my will, updated my insurance beneficiaries, and even had my lawyer draw up a new deed for the house that would make it much harder for anyone to claim ownership through marriage or common law relationships. The hardest part was dealing with my family, who were all excited about the wedding and had no idea what was really happening. My parents had already booked flights from Arizona, my sister had bought a bridesmaid dress and taken time off work, and everyone was so excited about finally meeting the woman who'd supposedly tamed their bachelor son. I couldn't tell them what was really happening because I needed Melanie to think everything was normal right up until the last possible moment. 3 weeks before the wedding, Melanie started getting suspicious about why I was being so calm about all the last-minute details and wedding stress. Most grooms are completely stressed out of their minds by this point, calling vendors and panicking about everything that could go wrong, but I was acting like I didn't have a care in the world. She kept asking if I was having second thoughts, if I was nervous, if there was anything wrong with me or our relationship. And every time, I'd just smile and tell her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Which was actually true, just not in the way she thought it was. 2 days before the wedding, Melanie's behavior started getting really weird and erratic in ways that made me realize she was probably having second thoughts about the whole scheme. She was jumpy and paranoid, constantly checking her phone every few minutes, and she kept making excuses to leave the house for hours at a time without explaining where she was going. I knew she was probably spending time with Alex, maybe having last-minute doubts about going through with the whole plan now that it was becoming real. But I also knew she was in too deep to back out now. She'd already quit her job 2 months earlier, claiming she wanted to focus on being a wife and maybe starting a family soon. All her stuff was in my house. She'd burned bridges with most of her friends by borrowing money she never paid back, and she had nowhere else to go. But then Rodriguez called me with information that changed everything and added a whole new layer to this mess that I never saw coming. Turns out Alex wasn't just some random guy who liked breaking up engagements for fun. He was actually working with Melanie on an even bigger con than I'd realized. They'd done this before, multiple times, targeting men who owned property or had substantial savings. The plan was always the same. Melanie would seduce the target, get engaged, and then either go through with the wedding and divorce quickly or find a way to get access to their money before the wedding even happened. And here's the really crazy part that made my blood run cold. They'd been researching me for months before Melanie ever approached me at that coffee shop where we supposedly met by accident. They knew about my house, my job, my salary, even my family situation. That cute story about how she accidentally spilled coffee on my laptop and insisted on buying me a new one? Completely planned. Every single thing about our relationship had been a lie from the very beginning. But Rodriguez had discovered something that Alex and Melanie didn't know I knew. Alex had been skimming money from their previous cons and hiding it from Melanie. He was planning to disappear with all the money once they pulled off the big score with me, leaving her holding the bag and facing potential criminal charges. So not only was Melanie planning to betray me, but her partner was planning to betray her too. It was like watching a house of cards built on lies and greed getting ready to collapse. The night before the wedding, she suggested we spend the evening apart, following some old tradition about the bride and groom not seeing each other before the ceremony. She was going to stay at her friend Tessa's place, she said, to get ready with the other bridesmaids and have one last girls' night before becoming a married woman. Of course, I knew she was really going to spend her last night as a single woman with Alex, probably celebrating how they'd managed to pull off what they thought was the perfect con. That night, while she was gone, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I went to our bedroom and opened the safe where I kept the engagement ring when she wasn't wearing it. She'd taken it off earlier that day, claiming she didn't want to risk losing it while getting her nails done for the wedding. I took that ring, the symbol of what I'd thought was our love and future together, and locked it away in a safety deposit box across town where she'd never find it. Then I called the wedding venue and told them there had been a family emergency and we needed to cancel everything immediately. The contract was in Melanie's name now, so technically she was responsible for all the cancellation fees, but I told them I'd make sure everything was sorted out properly. I did the same thing with every other vendor, caterer, photographer, band, florist, all of it. Canceled with less than 12 hours notice, which meant maximum penalty fees for everyone involved. But the real masterpiece was what I did next, and this was the part one was most proud of. I'd spent weeks putting together a comprehensive file of every piece of evidence Rodriguez had gathered, plus some additional research I'd done on my own. Photos, audio recordings, bank statements showing how much money I'd spent on this woman over the past 2 years, copies of text messages between her and Alex that the PI had somehow managed to get access to, and even evidence of their previous cons and victims. I put it all together in a neat little package with a detailed timeline of their entire scheme, and had it delivered to her father's house along with all the bills from the canceled wedding vendors. See, Melanie had always been Daddy's little girl, and her father had no idea what his daughter had really been doing for the past few years. Her father adored her, thought she could do no wrong, and had actually been planning to contribute $15,000 toward the wedding expenses as a gift to his daughter. He was a successful businessman who'd built his company from nothing, and he had absolutely zero tolerance for dishonesty, theft, or manipulation in any form. I knew that when he saw the evidence of what his daughter had been planning to do to me and others, he'd be furious. But I had no idea just how furious he'd actually be. The morning of what was supposed to be our wedding day, I woke up early and made myself a big breakfast for the first time in weeks. I was actually feeling pretty good for the first time since that night I got the 3 a.m. text message. No more pretending, no more acting, no more lying next to someone who was planning to destroy my life for money. I was free, and in a few hours, Melanie was going to discover just how much her little scheme had cost her in ways she never could have imagined. My phone started ringing around 9 a.m., and it didn't stop for the next 3 hours. First it was Tessa, Melanie's maid of honor, asking if I knew where Melanie was because she'd never come back to the apartment the night before and wasn't answering her phone. Then it was my own best man asking why the venue was saying the wedding was canceled, and all the vendors were sending him confusing messages. Then my mother, completely panicked and crying, asking what was going on and why she was hearing rumors that there wasn't going to be a wedding. I told everyone the same thing, that I'd discovered something about Melanie that made it impossible for me to marry her, and that I'd explain everything to them later when I had more time. Most people were shocked and concerned, but a few of my friends actually sounded relieved when I told them. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd had doubts about her, but nobody wanted to say anything because they thought I was happy and didn't want to interfere. Around noon, my phone exploded with calls from a number I didn't recognize. When I finally answered, it was Melanie, and she was absolutely hysterical in a way I'd never heard before. She was screaming so loud and incoherently that I had to hold the phone away from my ear to avoid going deaf. Apparently, she'd woken up at Alex's place that morning to find dozens of missed calls and text messages telling her the wedding was canceled. When she'd rushed home to find me and figure out what was happening, the house was locked and her key didn't work anymore because I'd had the locks changed the night before while she was gone. But that wasn't even the worst part of her morning, and things were about to get much worse for her. When she'd called her father to ask him to help her figure out what was going on and maybe give her money for a hotel, He told her exactly what he thought of her after spending the morning reading through the evidence I'd sent him. Not only was he not going to help pay for any of the wedding expenses, he was cutting her off completely and permanently. No more money, no more support, no more contact. He'd apparently told her that she was no longer his daughter and to never contact him or anyone in the family again. Then she'd found out about all the cancellation fees, which were way worse than she could have possibly imagined. Turns out, when you cancel a wedding with less than 24 hours notice, you don't just lose your deposits. You're responsible for the full cost of everything since the vendors can't possibly book other events on such short notice. The venue alone was charging her $40,000. Add in the caterer, photographer, florist, band, and all the other vendors, and she was looking at over $80,000 in bills that she had absolutely no way to pay since she didn't have a job or any savings. But here's where the story gets really wild and takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. While Melanie was having her complete meltdown on the phone with me, screaming about how I'd ruined her life and threatening to sue me for everything I was worth, Alex was apparently having his own crisis. See, he'd been under the impression that once Melanie divorced me, she'd be walking away with a significant amount of money and property that they could split. When he realized that not only was that not going to happen, but that she was now deep in debt and completely cut off from her family, he suddenly decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore. So while she's on the phone with me, demanding that I fix everything and pay for the wedding that was never going to happen, Alex was packing up her stuff and leaving it outside his apartment building in garbage bags. He'd apparently told her that morning that their relationship was over and that she needed to find somewhere else to live immediately because he didn't want to be associated with her anymore. That's when the really crazy part happened that made me realize just how far this woman was willing to go. Melanie showed up at my house around 3 in the afternoon, completely unhinged and looking like she'd been through hell. I could see her through the window, pounding on the door and screaming my name like a crazy person. She'd been crying so much that her makeup was completely destroyed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't answer the door, but I could hear everything she was saying, and I was recording it all on my phone just in case I needed it later. She started out begging me to take her back, promising she'd never see Alex again, claiming that the whole thing had been a mistake and that she really did love me. She said she'd do anything to make it right, that we could still have a future together if I'd just forgive her and help her pay off these wedding bills. For a moment, listening to her sob and plead, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she started getting angry when I wouldn't respond, and that's when her true personality really came out. She began threatening me, saying she'd tell everyone I was abusive, that she'd ruin my reputation in town, that she'd make sure I never found love again. She was going to claim I'd stolen money from her, that I'd trapped her in an abusive relationship, that I'd manipulated her into quitting her job, whatever she could think of to try to manipulate the situation back in her favor. That's when I called the police, and they arrived to find her trying to break into my house through a back window. I had Rodriguez's recordings of her admitting to planning to defraud me. I had evidence of her affair, and now I had her making threats and trying to break into my property. When the cops showed up, they listened to about 30 seconds of her screaming and decided she needed to be arrested for attempted breaking and entering, harassment, and disturbing the peace. But the story doesn't end there, because 6 months later I found out what happened to both of them. The last I heard about Melanie, she'd been forced to declare bankruptcy because of all the wedding bills and had moved back in with her mother in another state after her father refused to have anything to do with her. Apparently, her mother wasn't too happy about the situation either, especially when the collection agencies started calling about all those unpaid bills and her credit was completely destroyed. Alex, meanwhile, had moved on to his next target, but this time he picked the wrong woman. Turns out his new victim was the daughter of a very wealthy and very vindictive businessman who didn't take kindly to people trying to con his family. Alex ended up facing criminal charges for fraud and had to flee the state to avoid prosecution. As for me, I learned a lot about trust, about red flags, and about how sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone destroy themselves with their own actions and greed. I kept the house, kept my savings, and most importantly, kept my dignity and self-respect. 6 months later, I met someone new at a friend's barbecue, someone genuine who actually insisted on paying for her own dinner on our first date and split every bill down the middle. We've been together for 3 years now, and the difference between real love and manipulation is so obvious that I can't believe I ever fell for Melanie's act. The wedding vendors eventually wrote off most of Melanie's debt as a business loss, though her credit was completely destroyed in the process, and she'll probably never be able to get a loan or credit card again. Her father never spoke to her again, as far as I know, and her mother eventually cut her off too when she realized the full extent of what her daughter had been doing. And me? I sleep pretty well at night. knowing that sometimes the universe has a way of making sure people get exactly what they deserve when they try to destroy other people's lives for money. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.